Our story begins in a small village in India. There's a group of kids playing outside, and a storm is coming. But what they hear next is not exactly thunder, it's a huge airplane, and it's about to crash. We then meet CBI agent Shantanu. A text message from a friend urges him to check the news. Flight AO26 is missing, and the aviation ministry is at a loss. At work, his boss has some confidential details about the case. A plane crash was reported in a village near the Chinese border. That's way off the original route. The flight may have been hijacked, and it's up to Shantanu to find out. He is sent to the village right away, along with his colleague, Gaurango. At the army camp, an officer brings them up to speed. The crash site is in an area of difficult access, and the rescue team is making slow progress. The only two survivors are in critical condition. They were in the cockpit when the aircraft collapsed, and one of them is the pilot. The other half of the plane was completely burnt. Asking about the other survivor, Shantanu is told that the man was a passenger. No one knows what he was doing in the cockpit during the crash. The officer then tells them one more thing. This is not Flight AO26. It's a completely different plane. A few days later, Professor Subroto is surprised to see the CBI waiting for him after a lecture. The mention of a plane crash is even more puzzling to him, as he has a serious phobia. The only time he bought a plane ticket was decades ago, and he didn't even use it. Shantanu already knows that. If Subroto had used it, he would be in the morgue right now. That plane, which crashed only last week, had left Kolkata 35 years ago. Not as astonished as he should be, the professor begins to find a way out of this nice little chat. He can't remember why he bought that ticket, or where he was planning to go. Although no one is buying his act, the agents have no choice but to excuse him. At the hospital, both survivors are still unconscious. The doctor keeps complaining about the agent's behavior. The patients should not be disturbed at all. Shantanu manages to take a picture of the man's tattoo before getting kicked out of the room. Gaurango is in the hallway, eager to share the latest news. Flight AO26 has just been claimed by a terrorist organization. The ABA, or Azad Bangla Association, is a group determined to separate Bengal from India. They are demanding the release of Partho Mojumdar, one of their leaders. It might seem like this has nothing to do with the other flight, except for the tattoo. It's the ABA logo. Meanwhile, Professor Subroto is in a great hurry to get home and light a nice fire. As the poor man has no wood, he has to use this bunch of evidence that he's been keeping from the authorities. The next morning, one of the survivors wakes up. She says her name is Bihu Ghosh, the original pilot of Flight JL50. She tells Shantanu that the cockpit was invaded by two men shortly after they left Kolkata. One of them attacked the co-pilot, while the other forced her to change the route. After that, all she can remember is stormy weather, heavy turbulence, and the crash. Showing zero tact, Shantanu begins to interrogate her aggressively, asking about her involvement with the terrorist group. Bihu is a bit distressed to realize that she's a suspect of something. But what makes her totally lose it is when he says they are in 2019 now. Running to the nearest mirror, she sighs in relief to see she still looks young. Shantanu has more questions to throw at her, but that will have to wait until she's fully recovered. The doctor is already furious to catch him in the room without permission. Shantanu's boss asks him if he was able to obtain a photograph of the original pilot. Shantanu says it won't help much. The woman he saw at the hospital couldn't be over 30, which means that she wasn't even born when Flight JL50 vanished. He is certain that the ABA has kept the plane hidden, and now they're using it to draw attention to their cause. Both survivors are either accomplices or terrorists themselves. Gaurango is not so sure. Going through all the creepy stuff found inside the plane, he is obviously tempted by the Twilight Zone approach. Everything is from the 80s, and every piece of information checks. From his pit of boring logic, Shantanu says this might not even be the original plane. Maybe the terrorists recreated everything from the files. His partner is forced to succumb to reason. What he still finds hard to explain is how they orchestrated this kind of stunt without leaving behind any trace of recent tech. If Gorongo is intrigued by the absence of phones, just imagine Bihu's reaction when she sees one. The nurse is not even sure whether or not it is a joke. She doesn't know what that object is. While Sabrodo is crossing the country to have a look at the crash site, the agents are knocking on a few doors. They're trying to find someone who remembers Bihu Ghosh. Eager to gossip, one of her former neighbors tells them that Bihu had a stillborn baby, even though she was never married. Fetching an old album, the lady shows them a picture of her. Bihu Ghosh looks exactly like the woman who survived a plane crash 10 days ago. Even Shantanu is a bit shaken to see that, but quickly finds a little door into rational explanations. It must be that baby. The neighbor was delighted to stress that Bihu wasn't married, and that was today. Decades ago, it must have been even more of a scandal, which is why she chose to tell people that it was stillborn. Her daughter must have been tracked down by the ABA, brainwashed and recruited for this stunt. Discussing all this as they drive back to the hospital, the agents don't notice Professor Sabrodo in a taxi right behind them. He waits until they're gone, enters the ER, and fakes a heart attack. Once he's admitted to the hospital, he sneaks out of his bed to snoop around. The agents are also busy. The black box was retrieved from the plane, and Shantanu is now listening to the last recordings. The dialogue confirms the survivor's story about two men in the cockpit making her change the direction. After that, there's a long silence, and right before the end, someone says, "We are seconds away now." From the audio, they also get a name, Chandra. Gorongo is tasked with looking for that name in the passenger list, while Shantanu pays a visit to Partha Mojumdar in his prison cell. The terrorist is convinced that he'll be released in 3 days, in exchange for those VIP passengers aboard Flight AO26. When the other flight is mentioned, there is a noticeable change in his expression, but he refuses to say anything else. At the hospital, the man with the tattoo wakes up at last. He is extremely agitated and keeps saying that he should be celebrating this moment. The nurses rush in to put him under quickly. Shantanu tells his partner the news from the hospital. Gorongo is still reluctant about the logical answers to this puzzle. He says there is no Chandra in the list, but the body count is a perfect match. Flight JL50 and the new plane had the exact same number of men, women, and children. A personal phone call interrupts the discussion. Gorongo politely asks if everything is all right. Shantanu says it was the divorce lawyer. He just wanted to confirm his wife's middle name. But that seems to remind Shantanu of something related to the case, and it's the first time we see a little excitement in that miserable face. From an embroidered handkerchief and the names on the original list, he identifies a person whose middle name could be Chandra. It is soon confirmed that one of the passengers was Biswajit Chandra Mitra, who used to work in the physics department of Kolkata Science Center. He was also known for his association with extremist groups, and he was very vocal about his disapproval of the government. That last part makes the agent rethink their speech before knocking on the door. Shantanu introduces himself as an astronomer who's after historical documents. Mitra's son gives him access to his father's library. Shantanu finds blueprints of the airplane among other papers titled Project A. Declining to stay for tea, he promises to return the material soon. Then he turns around to leave but stops suddenly, looking totally shocked. There is a picture of Mitra on the wall, and Shantanu recognizes him. It's the same man who is in hospital right now. Creeped out by his hysterical laughter, the nurse says more than she should, revealing the existence of another survivor. The pilot is asleep in her room when he sneaks in and smothers her face with a pillow. She tries to fight back, and they keep at it until Mitra hears people coming. Grabbing a nurse, he holds a pair of scissors to her neck and comes out of the room. Shantanu is in the hallway, but he fails to catch him. Mitra flees the hospital in a stolen ambulance. The agent takes a taxi and tells the driver to follow him. What happens next is not exactly a car chase, given the heavy traffic. Both of them decide to ditch the wheels and keep going on foot. Running through back alleys that look like a creepy maze, Shantanu eventually loses sight of the suspect. He decides to go to the science center to find out more about the mysterious Project A. Gorango arranges a meeting with Dr. Bishwa, but he warns his partner that the man sounds a bit crazy. Dr. Bishwa says the project started in 263 BCE. Shocked at the horrors of war, Emperor Ashoka started a secret society. Their goal was to keep the advancements of science away from warfare. 9 men swore to protect different areas of knowledge, from martial arts to interplanetary communications. In the 20th century, some researchers found a series of strange papers. It was a complete study on time travel, but some of the equations were still incomplete. Project Ashoka, or Project A, was a failed initiative by the Science Center, and it was soon shut down. One of the scientists involved was Mitra. Everyone knew that he kept working on the equations, but he was very secretive. The only person who could know more about that is his former assistant, and it happens to be none other than our dear Professor Sabrodo. Confronted by Shantanu, he admits that he lied before. Not that anyone would have believed his story anyway. As Mitra's assistant, young Sabrodo witnessed his insane obsession with those equations year after year. The man neglected everything, including his own family. Finally, one day, he finished the equations and instantly realized what he was looking at. Those were the exact coordinates of a wormhole. Unfortunately, it was not very conveniently located. He needed an airplane to reach that point. Mitra was already a loyal member of the ABA, and Partha Mojumdar was a friend of his, so the organization let him borrow a few men to hijack Flight JL-50. Sabrodo knew about the whole experiment and, very understandably, chickened out. There must have been an error in the calculations because they were supposed to be gone for 35 hours, not 35 years. Sabrodo convinced himself it was all an elaborate hoax mixed up with some terrorism. Until 2 weeks ago, when the CDI showed up at the university. He made sure to see the crash site in person and even followed the agents to the hospital. He saw Mitra with his own eyes, and he had not aged a day. Not even remotely convinced, Shantanu is making an effort not to slap the old man. But then he says Mitra came to see him after escaping. He was jubilant with the experiment and didn't seem to care that it resulted in such a high body count. On the contrary, he is determined to increase the number by adding Bishu. The pilot is the only other person who knows the way to the wormhole, and he is not willing to share that privilege. He also told Sabrodo about his intentions to meet Partha Mojumdar, who's about to be released. Sabrodo says that the consequences of such an encounter would be catastrophic. The best way to prevent it is to go back to 1984 themselves and stop Mitra before he can hijack the flight. That would defeat the ABA completely, and they wouldn't even know it happened. Shantanu doesn't bother to reply to that idea, but he asks the old man if he can prove any of this nonsense. He says he can do that in 1 hour. Next thing we see is Bihu at the hospital. They are asking her for the coordinates, but she imposes one condition. She wants to fly the plane herself. Shantanu initially refuses, but Sabrodo keeps saying it won't take long. Gorango meets them at the hangar, begging his partner to be careful, not with his life, but with the expensive aircraft Gorango has just signed for. Once Bihu is deemed fit to fly, the trio takes off. Sabrodo stresses that there is a time limit for them to act. Flight JL-50 crossed the portal at 4:30 p.m. If they missed that deadline in the past, the present remains unchanged. Bihu asks him what is supposed to happen if they succeed. He says that, at 4:30 p.m. exactly, everyone will be where and when they are meant to be. If the flight is never hijacked, it will never crash into remote hills, and the three of them will never even meet. Almost like an echo of the black box recordings, Bihu announces that they are seconds away from their destination. She warns them to hold tight and then flies into very dark clouds. Everything blacks out for a moment and weird noises are heard. After an emergency landing, Shantanu scolds the professor for having risked their lives. He is done with this stupid demonstration now. They walk to the nearest road and flag down a vehicle, asking for a ride. Indira Gandhi is mentioned on the radio. She is referred to as the current Prime Minister. That's enough to convince Bihu. Indira Gandhi was assassinated in October 1984. Shantanu still struggles to accept the truth, but only until they reach Kolkata, or Calcutta, as it is still called. Not even the name of the city is the same, and there's no arguing with the reality around them. Future money gets them kicked out of the bus, so Shantanu has to sell his watch to pay for a room. Flight JL50 won't take off until tomorrow. With a shocking realization about the date, Shantanu runs to the local orphanage. A middle-aged man arrives in a car and leaves a child at the doorstep. Shantanu tries to ask him why he's doing that, but the man leaves in a hurry. So he comes closer to confirm what he already knows. He is looking at himself as a baby. In the morning, they go to Bihu's house so she can secretly borrow her own car. They try to be careful, but her mother ends up fainting at the sight of two bayous. But the real shock is when Shantanu sees the same car from last night. That means he was right about Bihu's baby. It was not stillborn at all. It was Shantanu. They drive to the warehouse where Mitra is having the meeting with the terrorists. Bihu will wait in the car while the men sneak up on Partho Mojumdar. But before they go, Shantanu asks her a question. He wants to know if she saw her baby. In the warehouse, the group is taken by surprise, and there's a shootout. Mojumdar and Mitra are both taken down. The equations are inside Mitra's suitcase. Shantanu strikes a match to destroy it. But there's still one more twist. Subroto is not here to help him save lives. He wants the glory for himself. Shantanu points out that whatever he does now won't matter because reality will reset in a few minutes. He knows that, but he also knows that young Subroto is coming to pick up his boss. He can leave the papers where he is sure to find them. Their fight ends with more gunshots. Subroto doesn't make it, and neither does the precious suitcase. Badly injured, Shantanu is trying to walk to the car when a deafening sound starts. When it stops, he can see Bihu is gone. Then it starts again and he blacks out. Shantanu wakes up on an airplane. The new memories are gradually loading into his brain. Arriving at Kolkata, he meets his mother at the orphanage. They are celebrating the day she found out the truth and came back for him. And this is the end. This was a recap of the 2020 miniseries JL50 by Flying Dragon Entertainment, starring Abhay Deol and Pankaj Kapoor. So, did you find any plot holes? Let us know in the comments below with #CinemaRecap. Until next time.